Joining me this week is Yaron Brook, president of the Ayn Rand Institute and co-author of the book Equal is Unfair. Yaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
I am very excited to talk to you because you guys sent me literature.
We
usually people send me a book maybe. I got the book too, but I got literature. I've done a tremendous amount of reading over the last couple of days, so I'm looking forward to this. So Ayn Rand, I mentioned at the top of the show, if just by saying her name, just by saying Ayn Rand, a certain percentage of people go bonkers, go completely bonkers. I'm sure I'm not illuminating you on anything.
No.
So before we get into the specifics of objectivism and her philosophy and all that, tell me a little bit just about her as the president of the Ayn Rand.
I mean, Ayn Rand was born to a middle-class Jewish family in St. Petersburg, Russia. She was Alicia Rosenblum, right? That was her name. And she witnessed communism. She saw it happen. She lived under it in her teenage years. And it was clear, given her personality, that she was not going to survive. She was not going to live through communism. She was going to get in trouble. So the family got together and they got her out. And basically there was a window of opportunity where Lenin allowed some people out to do research or do something with their studies. She got out in her early 20s, came to the United States with nothing, spent some time with family in Chicago, but then showed up in Hollywood. Her dream was to be a scriptwriter, to be a writer, and she loved Hollywood movies. She loved silent movies. And she goes to that first day, she goes to the Cecil B. DeMille studios, and with a letter of introduction, and they say, "Don't call us, we'll call you." Yeah. She walks out, and there's this big convertible, and Cecil B. DeMille is sitting right there. Huh. And he drives by, and she's staring at her. She's this little Russian woman. She's staring at him with these big eyes. And he stops the car, and he says, "Why are you staring?" And she tells him the story. "I'm here from Russia. I love your movies." He says, "Get in."
Wow.
And he takes it the back lot where they're filming The King of Kings, the story of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And he says, "Here's a week-long pass so that you can see how movies are made. You want to be in the movie business? This is how movies are made." So she does that. She lands up being an extra in the movie. She lands up meeting a future husband on the set. And this is her entry point into Hollywood. And she gets many, many little jobs in Hollywood. At night, she is writing and practicing her English. And she works in the wardrobe department. She works as extra. She works in all kinds. But in the end, she becomes a scriptwriter, and she writes some scripts. Some of the movies are made. And in addition, she writes a couple of plays. They are put on in both L.A. and on Broadway. She writes a book called We the Living, which is the most autobiographical thing she ever wrote, which is about a young woman growing up under communism in the Soviet Union and the choices she has to make. And
so what were some of those? What were some of those things before we?
Well,
what were some of the failures that she had to deal with, or what were some of the things that she had to live under with communism?
In communism, yeah. Well, you couldn't express your own opinion. You had to play out the party line. Her father, who owned a pharmacy, a private pharmacy, it was nationalized. It was taken away from him. They went from living a middle-class life in a nice kind of apartment to sharing an apartment with other families. During the Civil War in Russia, they escaped to the Black Sea and then had to go back to St. Petersburg. And just the grayness, the conformity, everybody being the same, the lack of any opportunities, the lack of any future. What are you going to do? You're always going to be the same. Yeah. There's no progress. There's no success. There's no advancement. You are expected to conform to standard. And this is what We the Living is about. It's a brilliant book. It's a short book. And it was made into a movie in Italy in 1942, I think, and later rediscovered in the 1960s. The book failed. And the book failed because New York intelligentsia in the 1930s were kind of enamored with communism, right? Communism was kind of cool.
Right.
And here was a book saying, no, communism was evil. And it was really one of the first books to paint that picture of communism. This is what's actually going on in Russia, not what you're reading in the New York Times, which is propaganda, but this is what's actually going on. She then wrote a little book called Anthem, which she couldn't find a publisher for in the United States and landed up being published in the UK a year or two before 1984, so it's kind of a dystopian novel, and there's evidence that Orwell probably read it. And then she wrote a book called The Fountainhead, and The Fountainhead was rejected by 12 publishers, ultimately published, became a word-of-mouth bestseller. To this day, sells over 100,000 copies a year, is a bestseller, has shaped and influenced the lives of many, many people. It's about an architect. And I don't know any architect out there. Yeah, I don't know any architect out there who hasn't read The Fountainhead, hasn't been impacted by The Fountainhead. It took her 12 years to write her next book, Atlas Shrugged, and that book became an instant bestseller. Publishers competed for it. And then she spent the rest of her life, that was published in 1957. She spent the rest of her life, she died in 82, writing nonfiction, developing the philosophy that she had discovered for Atlas Shrugged, that she really developed in Atlas Shrugged, but really articulating its applications in all kinds of areas. So she wrote newsletters and articles and books of essays from all through the 60s and into the 70s. And again, she died in 1982. Working, while she was still writing and very active.
Yeah, so I wanted to get a little bit of her history out because I feel like people don't know some of the history, that this is someone who came from communism, who came to love America and capitalism and sort of living for yourself, which is a lot of what objectivism is. So now let's unpack objectivism a little bit. There are 5 pillars, and give me the broadest objectivism breakdown.
So objectivism in one foot kind of is in metaphysics, which is the Aryan philosophy that studies what is out there, what is reality about. Reality is what it is. A is A, kind of law of identity, the law of causality, Aristotle's view of the metaphysical nature of reality. Reality is not created by another being. It's not what we want it to be. It's not what we wish it to be. It's not what some external consciousness created. It just is.
It's here and now.
It's here and now.
Okay.
We have, and this is kind of the epistemology, we have the tool to know it. We have senses to observe it, and we have reason to be able to integrate it, understand it, and actually ultimately shape it. It's not a creation of our consciousness. It's not a creation of our emotions. The way you learn about reality is not through emotions. It's through reason. It's through science. It's through using, what's uniquely human, which is our reasoning capacity, our rational thinking, our senses, and our senses are valid. Now, thinking, having reason, being rational, is a characteristic of the individual. We don't have a collective stomach to eat. We don't have a collective mind to think. Only individuals can think. So the unit in ethics is the individual. The purpose of ethics is to provide guidance for the individual on how to live the best life that he can live. What values and virtues to pursue to live a great life. And to live a life consistent with our nature as human beings, as rational, reasoning beings. So ethics is not about teaching us how to sacrifice for other people and how to die for them, but it's also not about getting other people to sacrifice for us and exploiting other people. It's about living a full, rational life.
Right. So, okay. So let's
That's
pause.
3, right?
That's 3, right. So let's pause there for a second. So a lot of what I've talked about here is that one of my problems with what has become the modern left is that they seem to now care more about the collective than the individual. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I've had on, she always talks about, if you care about minorities, you have to care about minorities within minorities. That's very much an objectivist way of looking at things.
Well, Ayn Rand said the smallest minority in the world is the individual. That's what it's all about. So the framework for everything in politics, in morality, is the individual, not the group. But you see, the moral left has bigger problems, in my view. That is, the modern left has rejected the idea of reason. The idea of reason is actually being efficacious in the world. It's rejected reason as the standard, beyond science, and even in science there's some questions, but beyond science, they've rejected reason as the standard by which we should evaluate reality. And this comes from philosophers like Kant and Hegel and Schopenhauer and so on, the German continental tradition, which basically said reason is a mind game. It's in here. We don't know what reality is. We can speculate about what real reality is, but what we see is ultimately shaped by consciousness, not by reality. Our senses actually distort reality. They don't identify reality. That has created a real epistemological and ultimately moral and political problem throughout the last 150 years.
So this is where you would say that we care sort of more about feelings over fact. Sometimes things will feel right to us. It seems right to say, well, the minimum wage should be $15 because you want people that are low income to make more money. That feels right, but it may not actually be what the system itself can
Well,
negotiate. Right?
it's not what happens in reality. That is, and this is what people call unintended consequences. I'm not sure they're always unintended, but the unintended consequences is if you think a little bit more about the problem, and let's take the minimum wage.
Yeah.
If you raise a price artificially, we all studied in Econ 101, when a price is raised, demand goes down. So if you raise the price of labor, then demand for that labor goes down, and this happens over and over again. But people don't want
to
believe that, but they also don't want to take the inductive evidence. That is, the fact that it's happened 100 times. Oh, but this time it's going to be different. And I see that in economics all the time. The Paul Krugmans of the world, stimulus never works. It's never worked. That's because it hasn't been big enough. We need to do bigger, and it's never going to work because they keep loading it up like that. And the same with the minimum wage. They keep thinking this time will be different, but that's anti-reason. It's anti-science. And what they're placing is wishes before facts, wishes before solid, theoretical theory that was derived from evidence from reality. I mean, that's the real scientific method.
Right. So when I've watched these debates, let's just stick on the minimum wage thing for a moment. Yeah. And, you know, Bernie says the $15 minimum wage. And as I said, it feels good. And I've worked minimum wage jobs, too. When I was in high school, I think I was making $6 maybe an hour. Sure. Or it might have even been less. I'm not even sure. But it sounds good. But what they also, because they don't think it through, well, McDonald's, if they're forced to go from $7.50 an employee or whatever it is, $9 an employee to $15, they're just going to replace them all with iPads, right? I mean, that's what I mentioned at the top of the show.
So absolutely. So first of all, you're going to get iPads to take orders. iPads are much more efficient at taking orders than people are. Yeah. But they're actually machines now. They will flip the burgers. They will do the whole process and bring you out, wrapped nicely, a burger, whatever you ordered on the iPad will get. So automation is going to happen anyway, right? But this speeds it up, and people are less prepared for it. But more than that, it's going to mean that teenagers, if you're a teenager growing up in the inner cities, and you're not trained because public education is a disaster, so you have no skills, right? So now you're expected to be able to perform at $15 an hour. You can't. The fact is, nobody will pay somebody to produce $10. It won't pay them 15 to produce 10, right? I'm not going to lose. When I tell this to kids, right? When somebody hires you, they're going to make money off of you. That's the nature of the transaction. You're going to make money off of them because your time is actually worth less than what you're willing to take at the salary, but they're going to make money off of you. Nobody's going to hire a kid who can't produce more than $7 an hour at $15 an hour. So those kids are just going to be priced out. So whether it means the McDonald's shuts down, whether it means they automate, whether it means they jack up prices significantly so that people now can't afford to buy the food that they're producing, so that nothing's changed in that sense, it's not good policy. We can talk about how to help poor people, particularly inner city kids. Yeah. But minimum wage is the dumbest, stupidest, most economically ignorant idea ever. And even Jerry Brown gets it. Right? Because why was this negotiated here in California? They negotiated like a 6-year term to phase it in. Right. It's because there was a ballot initiative that was going to go into effect that would have had minimum wage go up in the next 3 years. And Jerry Brown looked at that and said, oh my God, this is going to be disastrous for the California economy. So I'll compromise with these guys by spreading it out, which is the least damaging thing he could have done. But even Jerry Brown said there are trade-offs. And what are the trade-offs? Unemployment among young people. Some entrepreneurs going out of business, and yes, some people will make a little bit more money. Those are the kind of trade-offs that I find ugly. Right,
and this is where critical thinking is so important, because when I've watched the debates, Bernie says the 15 and gets applause for it because it sounds good, it feels good. Hillary said something like, well, we're going to get it to 12 and then figure it out. Now, I'm not even defending her other than to say that at least she's trying to play the game, at least, of reality, right? So in a weird way, you have to credit her. She's doing the Jerry Brown thing, right?
Yes, but this is a sad thing about America right now, and this is on the right and the left, because we're seeing the same thing with Donald Trump, is that after what I believe is about a century of progressive education, where we've taught kids not to think but to feel, not to be reasoning, rational agents, but to be feeling agents, we are suffering the consequence now. So we've got politicians who appeal purely to emotion, that don't discuss facts, that don't discuss evidence, that don't discuss Trump and Bernie, right? And don't discuss how they're going to get there. They don't discuss the details. They don't discuss how they pay for it. We're going to give you free stuff. We're going to get back at the Chinese as if the Chinese are the problem, and so on and so forth, right? But it's all emotion. It's all about emotion, and yet people are responding. And of course, you've talked about free speech, but this is the same kind of thing we're seeing on American campuses today. You can't say something that might offend somebody, and what does it mean to offend? It means that it's a little bit out of the mainstream because their emotions are hurt, and we're saying emotions are what matter. We'll give you a safe space. We'll give you triggers. We'll protect your emotions. No, we should be protecting the mind, and the way to protect the mind is to expand it, is to expose them to lots of different ideas and teach them the critical thinking skills that are necessary to figure out what's right, what's wrong, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. But that's out, and this is what scares me the most about America today. It's this emotionalism. So in that sense, it's an epistemological point. It's not even ethics. It's not politics. This is about what is the tool for knowing reality. Is it emotion or is it the mind?
Yeah. Well, you're throwing me all of my favorite stuff right there between the free speech stuff and
we
expanding
completely
the mind.
on free speech.
Yeah. So circling back to objectivism, did we miss any piece of it?
Sure, we missed the politics, right?
Yeah.
So if individuals are the moral unit, if the purpose of morality is to guide us towards our own individual happiness, if the purpose of morality is to give us the values and virtues, and if it turns out, as objectivism holds, that the most important of those is reason. So our cardinal value, if you will, is to cultivate your reason. The most important virtue, the virtue that integrates all other virtues, is rationality. Then the question is, okay, what kind of a world does a reasoning, rational individualist demand in order to be able to exercise his reason and rational? And the answer is freedom. All he wants is to be free, to be left alone so he can exercise his mind and pursue the values that he believes are good for him. Now, it might turn out that he's wrong, but then he needs to learn and adjust, and he needs to make those decisions, and he should be allowed to make mistakes. And the enemy of reason is force. The enemy of reason is coercion. So what we want is a political system that protects us from coercion. And the concept of individual rights, which the Enlightenment came up with, Locke and then the Founding Fathers, is the concept that recognizes that fact. It recognizes the idea that in order for people to exercise their reason, they have to be free. And individual rights mean, this is the right to life, means pursue the values necessary for your life. The right to liberty means think what you want to think, say what you want to say, write what you want to write. You have a right to use your mind in any way that you can in pursuit of happiness, right? That's the ultimate goal. So they recognize this individualism. So the core there is freedom, and the way I see freedom, the only free political system is a capitalist political system, a system in which the government's only job is to protect us from coercion. Its only job is to protect us from the use of force. So that's for the fifth pillar, which is a whole other area in philosophy, which I don't know if we want to talk about, is aesthetics. That is, given the type of consciousness that we have, we need a particular kind of art to reflect back to us the values that we have, so that it can inspire us, so that it can keep us going. It provides us with important cognitive and emotional fuel. So Ayn Rand believed in romanticism as that form of art, a representational. It has to represent something, but then it has to inspire. And she defined romanticism as art that recognizes the fact that individuals have free will, right? And all art that recognizes that, she would consider a superior art form to other art forms. So that's the.
But she didn't have to like the art specifically, right? If the artists themselves was expressing all of their humanity, right?
Well, the best example of that is that she recognized the genius and the greatness of Dostoevsky. And she considered him a romantic artist because he recognized free will. And if you've read Dostoevsky, you know, I mean, his characters are torn between choices, right?
Sure.
And she loved that kind of art. That was the essence of art. But philosophically, she was opposed to everything Dostoevsky wrote, right? She viewed his view of life as bleak, as awful. Hugo is another one. Hugo, who was a socialist. And Les Miserables ultimately has kind of a socialist, the plight of the poor type of theme. She considered Hugo the greatest literary figure in human history. the greatest writer in human history, and a great romantic writer because he had all these conflicts and this drama, which she loved.
Right, so that's really fascinating. So she didn't like the ideas that these people were putting forth, but she loved them as individuals, right? She loved the idea. She loved the idea that they were expressing.
She loved their aesthetic. She loved the way they communicated the idea, and the recognition. So what she separated is, so there's certain political ideas up here, but she believed that much more important than the political ideas are the fundamental philosophical ideas. So she looks at Hugo and he says, here's a great author who recognizes something very, very important, maybe the most important thing about human beings. We have free will. Versus many modern artists, many modern authors, where the story just rambles along, nobody makes any choices, everything's by accident. She would say they're denying free will. So even if they use beautiful prose, Shakespeare is a good example of this, right? Even if they use beautiful prose and they write beautiful stuff, because they're denying free will, you know, I really, really hate that. Now, I admire the prose, I admire the story, but I resent them philosophically. Hugo, because he recognizes something more fundamental than politics, in a sense, I'm willing to forgive the bad politics because we're allies on the more fundamental philosophy. I can get a lot of fuel, spiritual fuel, from the recognition of heroes, even if they're fighting for something I don't believe in.
Right, so really more than anything else, it sounds to me like she wanted to have the battle of ideas. And that's very much what I do here, what I try to get people to think about and to talk about. But unfortunately, we don't seem to live in a time when this is working, right? As you just said, between the Trump stuff giving you easy answers and the Bernie stuff giving you easy answers, we don't live in a time when the underlying bedrock is cared about.
But this is the danger of living in a time where we've elevated emotions among all else. Because once you accept emotions as your standard, there's nothing to talk about, right?
Right.
Because it's a question of, well, what you're saying makes me feel X, or what you're saying makes me feel Y. But that's not a conversation. A conversation is about reason, it's about ideas, it's about proof, it's about evidence. And that requires critical thinking skills, and we have trained maybe several generations, but certainly the latest generation, not to think, to emote. When we have 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds or 9-year-olds sitting around a classroom and we ask them, what do you think about something political? Well, that's ridiculous. A 5-year-old doesn't think about politics. He can't think, and even a 9-year-old can't think. What 9-year-olds need is a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, and the skills, the math and science skills, that train you in how to think. And our public education system has destroyed that. So what she was interested in is reason above all. She said, I'm a champion of capitalism because I'm a champion of rational self-interest as my moral goal. But I'm a champion of rational self-interest as my moral goal because I'm a champion of reason as man's basic means of survival, as his tool of knowledge. So the fundamental for Ayn Rand's philosophy, and this is what I think so many people don't get, and they respond emotionally to it, is reason. You know, and a lot of your audience says, we're for science, we're for reason, we're for facts, we're for science. Well, this is Ayn Rand. Right. Now we can debate the politics, but let's at least agree that the standard by which we have this debate is a standard of rationality. It's a standard of facts and evidence.